Hello, my name is Sarah Cordier, and I'm going to be presenting on assessment of backward walking speed in clinical research literature review. And just to start, as a brief introduction, clinical populations that have decline in mobility, backwards walking assessments reveal distinct balance and mobility deficits. The assessment of backwards walking is suggested to be better than forward walking to predict this mobility decline. And this is mainly because it places higher demand on motor, sensory, and cognitive systems while walking. And walking speed in particular is suggested to assess balance and mobility deficits and has been associated with fall risk. So, for example, here is somebody backwards walking. And this is very simple, can be done clinically very easily by the bedside with just a stopwatch. And then this is an example of gait right, which is another instrumentation used to assess backwards walking speed, more commonly found in research lab settings. For this literature review, research questions that we focused on include one, which clinical populations backwards walking speed has been tested in, and how has it been used in these populations? Then what psychometric measures have been established for backwards walking speed? What type of studies studied backward walking speed as an outcome measure? And what kind of testing protocols did they use? And how did this vary across the studies? So the purpose of the literature review was to describe how backwards walking speed has been used and reported in the literature, which is really the first step to identify future areas of study to establish and standardize the use of backwards walking speed in clinical research. In terms of the methods used, we did a complete literature review on PubMed, Pedro, and Sinhill using the keywords backwards walking and backwards walking speed. And we only included articles from 2000 to present. And the included articles utilize backwards walking speed as an outcome measure in adults, at least 18 years old. They had an objective calculation of backwards walking speed. They could have used any type of instrumentation, could have been a primary or secondary outcome, and they could have been any type of research design. Studies that we excluded included those that measured backwards walking speed as a part of a composite assessment that just reported the overall scores rather than a backwards walking speed time in particular. We also excluded any mechanistic studies aimed at just understanding the mechanisms of backwards walking in general. Any studies that were not written in English, conference abstracts, or dissertations. And after all of that, we were able to include 28 studies based on their relevance. And these studies were then extracted, the data from them was extracted and put in the table, which is seen in the middle here. And this is a summary of the results. So in terms of our research questions, the outcome measure of backwards walking speed has been studied in various clinical populations, including older adults, Parkinson's disease, stroke, dementia, Huntington's disease, chronic ankle instability, multiple sclerosis, older women, and breast cancer populations. Backwards walking speed reliability has only been shown in 3 populations: stroke, dementia, and Huntington's disease. There were more validity studies, and the majority of these were tested in Parkinson's disease. There were also a few in stroke, older adults, and Huntington's disease. And the majority of the intervention studies that included backwards walking speed as an outcome measure were from the Parkinson's disease population. And all but one of these studies showed improvements in the speed after the interventions. Then in terms of the type of studies, most of them were descriptive, followed by then a combination of randomized control trials and intervention trials for about the second half of the studies. The majority of the studies, in terms of their testing protocols that they used, had the backwards walking speed test done at comfortable self-selected speeds and on overground environments. Found that the instrumentation varied widely between the studies, some of them including the use of the stopwatch, as I mentioned earlier, or a gait right. Those are the two most common. Some other ones were Xeno walkway, motion capture systems, or photocells. And distances for the backwards walking speed test also varied a lot, ranging from 2.4 to 14 meters, with the most common distance being 5 meters. So to conclude these kind of results here, we really find that despite the increased use of backwards walking speed in clinical research, the psychometric properties haven't really been thoroughly established, and we really need reliability, validity, and responsiveness to be tested across these different clinical populations in order for us to use it in clinic. So backwards walking speed, it has only been tested in a few clinical populations, and in these studies, they had relatively small sample sizes. So larger sample sizes are needed to give us more stronger evidence so we can test the utility of backwards walking speed. There's also a lot of variation, as I mentioned, in the methodologies used to conduct backwards walking speed tests. And this really just limits the ability to compare the test among different populations and just in the clinical research in general. So future studies really need to establish backwards walking speed across different clinical populations and validate and standardize the protocol. So in conclusion, the evidence really shows the potential of backwards walking speed as an outcome measure to assess balance and mobility in clinical research. But in order to really use this information, there needs to be validation across different populations. So there really is an urgent need to validate a standardized protocol to measure backwards walking speed and to minimize testing variations in clinical research. Thank you.